Ladies and gentlemen, the world has fragmented at just the right time when AI leadership is becoming more critical. To discuss this important problem, please welcome Meredith Potter, Executive Director of the American Security Fund, and John Raidt, Fellow at the Atlantic Council. The conversation will be moderated by Machalagh Carr, Head of Global Policy at Palantir Technology.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. When we look at the subject of today's speech, AI leadership in a fragmented world, one question that arises is what do we mean by fragmented? Having this Expo in Washington, D.C. in 2025, it's easy to first think of the political fragmentation here in Washington. But it's not just about us, right? So there's political fragmentation, and then within U.S. government itself, there's fragmentation between and amongst executive branch agencies, and what, if anything, will the legislature do, and what should they be doing? There's fragmentation amongst and between the government and industry. Who should be leading? What are the voices? Who should we be listening to? And what decisions need to be made in order to answer those previous questions? And then we pull back a little to the international environment. We are lucky today to have a presence of several of our allies. There are countries here to be part of and participate in this Expo. We've seen a presence from Ukraine, Israel, Estonia, Japan, Poland, France, the Czech Republic, Taiwan. So when we talk about fragmentation in a fragmented world, there is also a difference between what is America's role and how does that juxtapose with the international community, and what differences are arisen through the answer if we're talking about our allies, some of whom are here today, and not our allies. And so when we talk about fragmentation, I want to think about that in a holistic approach. All of those elements really kind of drive to all the different ways we have some problems to solve or some questions to ask today. And so, John, I'm going to start with you. In an increasingly fragmented geopolitical landscape, what does it mean for a nation or a coalition to lead in artificial intelligence?
I think first it really requires preeminence in the innovation, development, deployment, and commercialization of AI solutions. That's number one. Number two, I think the United States, our allies, need to be the model for governance to ensure ethics, safety, security, and the fact that AI is being harnessed to improve the human condition. I think third, we have to have a vision about what AI means and how it can improve the human condition, and we have to be able to master and really understand all the ways it can be abused and weaponized. And I think doing that right puts us in a position, put our allies in a position to be the standard setters, which is very important because two very competing visions of where the world should go between ourselves and democracy and how autocracy would use these things. And what I think we can't do is what we did with 5G networks. We got way behind the curve, and the Chinese were able to steal the march. They were able to deploy their systems through Huawei throughout the world, undercutting us on cost, and they were used as ISR platforms for the Chinese security and intelligence services. With AI, the stakes are too great. We cannot afford to be playing catch up. We have to get out ahead of it, and that's, in my mind, what it means to lead.
Absolutely. Meredith, again, what does it mean to lead? Is there anything that you'd like to add to John's answer?
Yeah, I would start by agreeing with everything you said, Machalagh. Fragmentation can be global, it is global. There are lots of states and non-state actors moving in the world, some trying to reshape world order and some trying to challenge the very notion that the world should be ordered. But fragmentation is also domestic. In this country, tech companies, particularly competitors, can have fraught relationships. Tech companies and the US government can have fraught relationships. Those relationships can fail to remind us of, the government sponsoring the Manhattan Project during World War II, or Bell Labs innovating for the government during the Cold War. But despite that fragmentation, I think we should be clear-sighted. Despite that fragmentation, I want the United States to lead the world in AI, not just because I'm American and proud to be American, which brings some bias to the conversation, but because I think of the very few countries in the world that have the capacity to lead the world in AI, the US advances the values that I would like AI to be imbued with the best, right? Privacy, evidence-based information, which I think helps empower freedom of the press, freedom of speech, all these sorts of values. And so what does it look like for the US to lead in AI? I think maybe our goal should be to overcome our own fragmentation so that when we look at the fragmented world and we approach it, we're a little more united, we're a little more consistent. I think the best way to do that might be to develop a strategic framework of what AI is in this country and of where we're trying to go. I would say, therefore, our strategy, if our goal is to sort of overcome our own fragmentation, our strategy should be to sort of treat AI as like a three-legged stool and to get to work investing in all three legs of that stool. I would say the first leg is private AI, aka industry, aka constantly asking the question, are we doing everything we can to advance American tech innovation? I'd say number two is public AI, aka the government, aka constantly asking the question, are we doing everything we can to protect American tech security? And then I would say like the third sort of funky leg of the stool is ethical AI, aka constantly asking the question, are we doing everything we can? Are the other two legs of the stool doing everything they can to make sure that AI remains something humans can understand, something humans can control, including if we choose by turning it off. And this third leg is where I would house things like investing in AI alignment, including nascent but really compelling approaches like neuromorphic computing, brain-inspired AI architecture. It's also where I would house engaging strategic parts of civil society. I'm very interested in engaging like professional ethicists as a category of people. I think we can learn a lot in the AI space from bioethicists who strike me as representative of the last time humanity made a scientific leap forward that then compelled us to stand up and say, we need a discipline, an entire discipline that is concerned with keeping this stuff ethical, accountable. It needs to be something you can get a degree in. It needs to be something you can do full time. I think we can get this wrong if we fail to treat the three legs of the stool as important and as interrelated. So I think that triangle framework might be helpful.
Excellent. John, having served on commissions focused on national and homeland security, how do you view the intersection between AI governance and institutional preparedness for AI-driven threats, including, keywords here, misinformation and infrastructure disruption?
Yeah, maybe we'll start with infrastructure. So I think the first rule would be not putting our head in the sand, to be very candid, very honest, and very imaginative about how AI can be abused and weaponized. A lot of people called the attacks on 9/11, I'd served on the 9/11 Commission staff, as a failure of imagination. It wasn't a failure of imagination. We imagined that terrorists could use airplanes as weapon. It's just we didn't imagine they would, and that is because the formula that was used, the algorithm, if you will, for risk assessment was threat is basically intent plus capability. Nowhere in there did you look at consequence. And when you look at AI and when you layer over quantum over AI and you see the magnitude of how the technology can be abused, we can't afford to go back to that old formula. We have to have a really good sense of every way you could abuse and misuse and weaponize AI, and be sure that we had layered defenses to counteract it. Otherwise, I think we're putting ourselves at grave risk.
Meredith, you mentioned that there might be an approach, but first we would have to kind of get our disk fragmentation back in order. When we've successfully done that as a country and challenged or risen to the occasion, it seems to be in times of great crisis. Either world wars, where we have actually pulled ourselves together and figured out ways to kind of change the entire industrial complex, for example. When you work closely with Dr. Kissinger and others, you worked with him to explore strategic implications of AI. How should the U.S. balance its global AI leadership ambitions with the national security challenges posed by our current problems, including rivals like China?
Yeah, well, for the audience, I had the good fortune of working for Dr. Henry Kissinger when he learned what AI was and promptly got obsessed with it. 5 years later, you know, he wrote two books about the subject, including the only book he ever told co-authors to go ahead and publish without him posthumously. And of course, his co-author was Eric Schmidt, whose generosity is the reason we're all here today. So that's useful context. I would say two things about him. One, he was so proud of America. He had the immigrants' relationship with America. And two, he was so preoccupied with world order to the point that he also wrote a book on that subject. And with those two things in mind, I would make two recommendations. The first, I would say to know what our competitive advantage is, which is our innovation ecosystem, which birthed Silicon Valley, which is pro-entrepreneurship and the many risks that entrepreneurship requires, and to give that competitive advantage what it needs to succeed. You know, the AI industry to me has always actually been an amalgamation of 4 sub-industries. There is the AI itself, and a lot of those companies are represented here today. There's also, secondly, the ICT that the AI runs on, and I mean hardware and software. I mean everything from cables to satellites to data centers to cloud infrastructure. Third, there's the semiconductors that AI uses, and fourth, there's the energy that AI uses. And so when I say empower our competitive advantage, what I mean is give those 4 industries the tools that they need to succeed. One of the things I've been struck by in the last few months is that when the White House asked for public comments on its development of its AI action plan, the first striking fact was that it got 8,700 sets of comments from AI companies, organizations, and individuals. But for me, the second striking fact was that a lot of the companies were very clear about the assists that they need from the US government, and they were united. Mm-hmm. I doubt they coordinated. As I said earlier, many of them are competitors, but their comments really echoed that they need 2 assists from the government. The first is export controls to protect what they've already invented. And the second is security, like physical and cyber security to protect what they're currently inventing. So in their comments, Microsoft called itself critical infrastructure. OpenAI asked for the US government to help it substantially enhance its security. That may have been Anthropic. If I'm confusing them, I apologize to those companies, particularly their representatives here today. One of them asked explicitly for intelligence and counterintelligence, and Google asked for information sharing, which strikes me as the same request using different terminology, right? Sort of not Washington terminology. So fundamentally, my first recommendation is let's give them those things. They've asked for them. They need them to succeed. Let's give them those things not out of charity or for fun, but because that's what we can do to maintain our competitive advantage. My second recommendation, which is where I have Henry Kissinger in the back of my mind whispering world order, is to work with our tech allies. In the short term, I think that ICT is a great, humbling example of when we may not have the best solution and our allies may have the best solution. I agree with John. The United States has largely lost the world's race for 5G. We aren't the home of a major, clean, trusted vendor, but Sweden is, Finland is, Japan is, South Korea is, and so if we're looking at a problem set as a group of tech allies rather than as just ourselves, then we can bring different solutions to that table. In the medium term, I'm totally preoccupied with India. I'm watching Micron's investments in like semiconductor assembly testing and packaging in India, Microsoft's investments in data centers there, Amazon's investments in cloud infrastructure there. And actually earlier this year, for the first time ever, India's exports of Apple phones to the United States surpassing China's exports of Apple phones to the United States. I'm also watching the Trump administration's approach to India. I think for all the complexities of President Trump's relationships with some of our Western Hemisphere and European allies, He and his cabinet seem determined to treat the Indo-Pacific as crucial. I think they should. I'm biased. I'm a tech Asia and tech in Asia person, but I've been encouraged by things like President Trump's hosting of Prime Minister Modi here, Vice President Vance's trip to and remarks in India, and just this past weekend, Secretary Hegseth's trip to and remarks at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, where he announced the expansion of the U.S.-India security partnership, the deepening of the Quad, U.S.-India, Japan-Australia diplomatic partnership, and literally said America first doesn't mean America alone. So the allies would be my second recommendation.
And John, following up on that, when you overlay the current kind of world environment with the knowledge that you gain from the 9/11 Commission, when we look at how do these relationships with our allies impact our relationships with our rivals, if at all, and what would you recommend we do to continue to strengthen that group?
Yeah, let me comment. First of all, I agree, but I would also say that one of our comparative advantages is our values. And I think we have to center a lot of our effort around that, particularly as we're operating in the international environment. And the fragmentation theme, the title of this fireside, I think really hits at what you were saying. The fact that two things. One, the United States in AI and everything can't prosper and succeed unless we have really strong security, economic, and trade alliances. We can't go it alone. The reams of academic papers and political papers and expert papers that is the only way to counter the rise of China is when we unite with our allies. So the international fragmentation is important, is solving that as it is the domestic.
Excellent. What concrete steps, John, we'll start with you, should the U.S. take to operationalize tech diplomacy with key allies, and how do we measure success in building tech diplomacy coalition? What are the metrics?
Yeah, I think first is explaining to ourselves and the international community why diplomacy is even necessary. The fact that export controls, IP, supply chain, security, all these things are a reason why we need to have diplomacy. And be able to explain all there is to gain and all there is to risk if we don't have strong alliances in this area. And following up on that, we need a strategy to have a diplomatic strategy to that. I'm not sure that abolishing the special envoy for emerging and critical technologies is a great way toward that path. But even if we create some structure to be able to be the lead point in diplomacy, one thing we're going to really need to do is make sure we sync up the whole of government. And that is making sure that every node, whether it's Commerce, Treasury, IC, DoD, understands what the strategy is and is articulating it and pushing it with their counterparts among our alliances in the international community.
Excellent. Given the rapid response, Meredith, of the rapid pace of AI development, how should democratic nations adapt their institutional structures to respond to emerging AI threats while maintaining transparency and accountability that distinguish them from their authoritarian competitors? How do we, John just spoke about our values, how do we keep that as forefront, great American exceptionalism, while continuing to push this issue?
Well, thank you so much for the very easy question. I think John has described like step 0, which is the most fundamental, and that's coordination across our own government, agreement across our own government. I have served in government, actually all three of us. I was gonna say John has served in government, so has Machalagh. So the people sitting on this stage are familiar with just how many interests, institutions, perspectives you have to work through even to speak as just the United States. So step 0, crucial. But after that, I would say step 1 is to then go to our allies and to cohere our concepts, right? Before we start having a conversation about our policies, what the policies are going for, our tools, how they can be deployed, I would actually have a conversation about our concepts. And in those conversations, I would ask questions like, what is your definition of AI? Is it the same as our definition of AI? Importantly, particularly in the military context, I would also ask, what is your definition of AI alignment? is it the same as ours? What that's going to require as a first step, this is happening, but I would ramp it up. What that's going to require as a first step is always putting AI on our bilateral agendas, right? Every time the US and India meet, every time the US and Japan meet. The second thing it might require is creating like a G7 or a G20 for tech. You get to be a member of not based on the size of your overall economy, but on the strength of your tech ecosystem. So we should all stay tuned and watch that space. Once we've cohered our concepts, I would say as step 2, that's when I would inventory our tools across the allies. You can finance in case A, I can finance in case B, you can intervene in case C, I can intervene in case D. I think a systematic accounting in a G7 for tech type of framework would give us a resource to consult to make strategic decisions in 2 situations. The first is when it would be appropriate for one of us to intervene rather than another one of us to intervene. So that's the situation I'm describing in the 5G world, where if the government of Korea can finance Samsung being a solution to a problem that United States industry simply can't match, then I think that's great. But we've got to have the inventory that we're using to make that decision. It will also help us make decisions about situations in which we should intervene together rather than alone, like when a multilateral approach would be appropriate. So step number 2, inventory our tools. And then third and finally, I'll agree with what John said. The third step is then, after we agree on our concepts and our tools, is to cohere our policies. And John spoke about export controls, and that's what I would foot stomp, is that export controls to me are the perfect example of a policy approach that is really only effective, is certainly more effective, but I would argue is really only effective when it is cohered with Japan's export control regime, South Korea's export control regime, Singapore's export control regime. All of those countries happen to be in the Indo-Pacific surrounding our sort of primary AI competitors, so I think really important to cohere our policies with them. Fundamentally, like when I say step 0, step 1, 2, 3, what is it that Henry Kissinger is whispering in the back of my mind there? He wrote about this, so it's not a secret, but I think it is profound. AI struck him as the world's next great need for arms control, and he didn't know what we know now about AI. He actually passed away before he got to interact with even the current version of ChatGPT or Claude. But it struck him that it was going to be necessary, that it was going to be very difficult, and that the primary reason it was going to be very difficult was because it was going to require us to do something other than regulate the amount of AI we could have, right? When he sat across from Soviet interlocutors during the Cold War, they were able to say things like, I'll go to 1,000 warheads with 500 of them armed at a time, if you'll go to 1,000 warheads with 500 of them armed at a time. And that's just not possible with AI. You can't limit the amount of AI that a country can have. You also can't, frankly, limit the amount AI can learn, because that's the very definition of AI. It learns, it evolves over time, it trains both on the information you feed it and on its own historical performance. So you're going to have to limit something else. His suspicion, which I haven't heard a better one, his suspicion was that what we would have to come together as sort of the tech powerhouses of the world to negotiate was limitations on what AI could be used for. So we'd have to sign some sort of treaty that said it is inappropriate to use AI to attack New York City's public transportation system or water distribution system. And if one does, the United States will meet that behavior as an act of war. That negotiation could very well be the most difficult negotiation we have ever conducted, like in the history of the United States. And for that reason, for me, every single antecedent step into going into that room is to talk to allies, get on the same page as allies, go into that room really confident that my allies agree with my definitions, that I know what their tools are, that they know what my tools are, and that we're all sort of going for the same goal.
Could I
Yes,
dovetail
please.
on that? I mean, the issue, though, is the complexity, unlike the Cold War or the nuclear scenario, is the power of AI isn't just at nation states. It's not just at terrorist and transnational criminal groups. It's down to the individual, which is a whole order of complexity in danger. And again, it requires that we work very closely with our allies to cover as many bases as we can. We can't do that alone.
So then you're not going to like my next question.
Okay.
Okay. So a lot of this conversation has centered around how necessary it is to get on the same page internally so that we can then go and get on the same page with our allies. But we're not right now on the same page internally within either major political party in this country, let alone the two political parties agreeing. We are not on the same page with many of our allies about even basic definitions, Meredith, of what is AI, let alone what would be an appropriate line to draw. So where do we begin getting on the same page? John, I'll start with you.
Wow, I didn't like that question at all because it's...
Well, I like that she started by asking John.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Otherwise...
Well, it's the Gordian knot, but I guess, countries and political parties tend to come together when the stakes are great and the dangers are enormous. And I think maybe we don't have a public recognition yet that that's where we are, but we'll get there. Hopefully we'll do it without catastrophe, but sometimes that's what it takes. But we absolutely have to sync ourselves up before we can sync with other countries. So you asked a question that's way over my knowledge base or pay grade, but I'll turn it over to you. How do you fix it?
Oh no, should we all go get coffee?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe two thoughts. Two things that might unite us are the nature of the threat, the scope, this combination of sort of risk and likelihood or magnitude and likelihood. When you engage Capitol Hill on AI, you'll actually hear the joke. I mean, spend one day on Capitol Hill and schedule 5 meetings on AI. Someone will tell you, I used to view AI one way, and then I went in a skiff and got my first classified briefing on where our pacing threat is, and now I've changed my view. Let's accelerate, let's invest, let's give them the intelligence and counterintelligence they're asking for. And so I'm hoping that we're developing the most sophisticated concept of the pacing threat we've ever had, and that will mobilize us to action, I'm hoping. The other thing that I think should unite this town is that the companies are more united than we maybe thought they were before we asked them all to write down their views on AI, what they want from this White House, what they want from this administration. So almost to return to one of the first points I made, like maybe that's a great place to leave it. The companies are asking for two things. They're asking all of government. They don't care. They're not in the minutia of every single agency that's involved in the imposition and the enforcement of export controls. But my goodness, the number of times that the phrase export controls appears if you keyword search all 8,700 comments for the phrase export controls. So that's one, and then of course, the second thing that they've asked for, just security, physical security, cyber security. It's something that the US government does well. It's something that our intelligence community does well. And so I'm hoping that maybe the fact that one thing I think is different about where AI was a year ago and where AI is now is that a year ago even, like at this Expo last year even, companies were largely saying, we're good, like thank you, we agree, our AI should be ethical, we red team it, we test it internally. If it's US based, like we can guarantee that it won't tell you how to build a biological weapon in your basement or your garage. And we can also guarantee that it will tell you what happened in Tiananmen Square. So we're good, but like thank you for mentioning that you think it should be ethical. Where we are now is that they've put in writing and submitted to the public record that they are desperate for the US government's help across parties, across branches of government, across departments, for help with export controls to protect what they've already invented, and security, physical and cyber security, to protect what they're currently inventing.
Yeah.
We're going to have to leave it. Oh, did you have
I would just,
anything to add?
with 30 seconds, it sounds simplistic, but I think one of the very fundamental planks is education.
Absolutely.
And not just public education, but education of our political leaders, because I think we are way behind the curve, and you can't set good policy, you can't sync up the various nodes of power unless there's a good understanding, and we've got a long way to go there. And SCSB does great work doing that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It sounds like where we started is kind of where we ended. We cannot do this without industry and government, and we should not be doing this without a strong, confident understanding of our ethics. And so thank you for coming, and thank you both for your time.
Thanks very much.